Welcome to CTO Think, a podcast about leadership, product development, and tech decisions between two recovering chief technology officers. Here are your hosts, Don Vandemark and Randy Burgess.
Hey, Randy, what have you been doing this week?
Let's see, quickly. A lot of focus on React Native, where I've started a project with a group at the University of Chicago for a research-based application. And we're using React Native on the front end, Firebase on the back end. So this is one of those things where we take a lot of the requirements that have been given to us and we start to map out how we're going to link that to the like what tech to use on the solution. So design related stuff, research related stuff. A lot of my week has been tied to that. And
well, let me before you hit the end.
Yeah.
Did they drive the React requirement, or is that you're driving that? Because I know you've also been diving a bit into Vue.
They did not, but what they wanted was they had a small budget and they want to have Android, an app for Android as well. And I just told them at your budget, you need a hybrid or single build solution. There's no way you can afford a Swift developer and a Java developer. And the app as it stands, the requirements don't require a lot of complexity that you might push outside of. You need Swift tools for this exclusively or Java. So it fit a really good place where we could build it in a React Native type of code base framework and get what they needed done in a smaller time frame.
Okay. What was your and?
Oh, this ties into what we're going to talk about today. I've been just reading a lot of emails from various companies that I forgot I ever had an association with.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
What have you been up to?
So I'll do what I've been up to. So it's the end of the school year. We have friends who have children graduating from high school. So went to a high school graduation yesterday. And it's good time. They're family. They're just like family to us. So
awesome.
But other than that, trying to figure out which of the 5 things I want to work on, I'm going to work on in that moment. So, but yes, so specifically to your email inbox problem, which is a problem that all of us are facing right now. The EU 18 months ago, maybe more, passed a regulation called GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, that the core basics of it revolve around explicit consent, easy to read privacy notices, and the right to get your data deleted from their service if you choose. So the initial, I don't want to go there yet. So what we've been doing within Aspire EDU is we've been trying to determine how that affects us. We can go a bit into the details of it. The consent part is not really managed by us because we are a data processor. So the GDPR breaks entities into 2 different categories, data controllers and data processors. Mm-hmm. The data controllers are the ones who actually collect your data. They're the ones that will talk to you about, hey, we want to use your data for X. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And then they employ us to actually do the processing. So we don't have to go get consent. That's on the data controller. We probably do need to have a nicely written privacy notice. And our privacy notice now isn't covered in legalese, so we're probably covered there. Where we're going to, I'm not going to say struggle because I don't think we'll struggle. Where the most work will come in will be where an end user of our client services say, I want my data deleted.
Yeah.
So because our clients are schools, that's going to also say, I want my data deleted from your school. Okay. So I don't see this happening a lot. It could happen that a student, after they complete their coursework, will say, delete all my data. And then we'll go through the mechanics of doing that. But I just don't see that happening a lot because people like to keep their school data intact. But that's really where we've been driving. And that's why you've been seeing the emails is you've got all these companies saying, you now have to explicitly let us use your data for what you want, or we need to update our privacy notice so you can actually read it instead of having to hire a lawyer to read it.
But let's talk about the pattern we saw with the emails, because what we saw over the last few months was a few companies at the forefront started sending out these notifications. And all they said was, we've changed our privacy. Like I noticed initially it was, we've made changes to our terms of service. We've made changes to our privacy policy. You should read this, what have you. Or you need to approve this, whatever. And then we started to see this trickle in. Like you said, it was almost to me like all the technology companies were in a room and they got assigned homework a year and a half ago. And they all waited to the very last minute, which is today. This is Friday, May 25th. We're recording this. And you just saw this deluge in the last week, which actually told me more about the human side of this is there's a lot of companies that thought this wasn't a big deal until this month. And they started like, oh, crap. Everybody's starting to do this. What did we do? Like, I don't know how long it takes a company to get up to board on this, but it seemed to me like if all these companies are doing it at the last minute, like on a Thursday before the due date, that means they were scrambling the last month or two, noticing that, oh, wait, if all these companies are actually taking it serious, so we need to do the same thing. Last time I saw this was Y2K, which had a way more press. But this time around, it seemed like, oh, crap. Do we care about this? Maybe we really do now because I'm seeing so many providers doing it. That's what I saw and thought about it from the.
Well, and this was so we'll take a minute and I'll talk about it like I explained it to my wife because I was going through my emails yesterday, just deleting privacy policy after privacy policy, and I said, "Hey, have you noticed this?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, so here's what happened. EU passed this regulation and." What happened was that applies to any EU citizen. So most companies, I think, decided it didn't apply to them. And then finally came to realize that if they have one user that is an EU citizen, they have to be ready to manage that one user.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, and it's going to vary depending on the company. If I make a request to a company to delete my data, GDPR doesn't apply to me. I'm not an EU citizen. So are these companies going to delete my data, or are they going to say, yeah, we're not doing that in your region yet? That's an interesting side effect of all of this is, are they going to treat users differently based on whether they're affected by GDPR or not? Let's not, for the non-technical out there, let's not understate the complexity, difficulty, and just sheer workload of deleting a user from your system.
From backups.
And from backups. And backups is a complete, we've had to do some reading on, do backups apply? And the answer is nobody knows. So it's, if you have one single database and you have 3 tables and one of them holds user information, yeah, it's not that big a deal. It's still not straightforward, but it's not that big a deal. It's when you're hold on. It's when you're a larger company, and you may want to break this down, but I want to finish this point. It's when you're a larger company and you have 5 systems interlocking, passing data back and forth, all connecting it in different ways, that all of a sudden you're like, I have no clue how we're going to delete all this data from our systems.
Well, I can't think of any application I've built for anybody, any size, that doesn't have a user ID all over the freaking place as an association. Like, that user is the heart of almost every relational database I've built. There's just all these has many users, belongs to user, what have you. So the idea of a deletion is crazy to me. To think that I'm going to, like, I have soft deletes as a practice the last few years for a lot of clients, because you don't want to delete a user and all of a sudden you've lost order data, usage data, all these things. Now, can you just change the user's personal details to some other like nonsense name and say, this was a user that requested deletion, but we're going to keep the fact that this now phantom user made these actions? That's where I'm completely befuddled, because if you flip it around, there's a whole body of government that's like, don't delete things. We want to have a record of actions that people take. And I'm like, well, who do I answer to here? The privacy people or the financial people?
And that's where everybody is like, we don't know what's going to happen here. And that's where you and I batted this back and forth over the past week. In trying to parse this, because you're right. There are some places where you have to maintain records for 7 years. Well, what if a user asks to have that information deleted? How does that apply? We don't know. Maybe it's in GDPR. Maybe it's covered in there.
Because if your data was associated with like an outside government and something involving a campaign finance database, it's really convenient to be able to say, I want that deleted, and then say, well, I'm just following GDPR rules. Right. Sure. Like, it's just such a gray area. My assumption is that this deleted data, I guess the whole subject of this episode is not GDPR. It's more about dealing with things outside of typical scope of your job in a CTO technical leadership role. But we've already talked about 2 things that, to me, I want a lawyer to talk to me about more than I want to be the expert. Like, I'm the expert. I can be the expert on deleting something. I can be the expert on archiving, accessing, CRUD on the record. But if you want to talk to me about policy, like, I'm not an attorney.
Yeah.
I don't deal. I'm not a compliance expert. I'm supposed to manage some of that, but I always consider myself more of the execution. What is the role of a technical leader dealing with this stuff outside of normal scope? That's the bigger subject, right?
And some of the reading I've done, and some of the videos I've watched, and trying to make sure I was as up to speed as I can. There was one webinar someone did where somebody put up a poll and said, okay, of everyone here, who thinks who of the following entities is responsible for executing? And they put up IT, legal, procurement, other. And most people said IT, and then other, and then maybe legal got a few votes. And the next question was, who will be blamed if this is this is not processed properly? And the percentage was even higher on the IT side. When this is purely a policy decision, it is a legal decision. The technical execution is on IT's hands.
Yeah.
But the responsibility for interpreting whatever the EU is, a collection of countries' legal regulations, that has zero to do with IT. You tell me what you need done, we'll go do it. Don't ask me to interpret law. And that's what we've done. And as you said, that's what kind of where I wanted to go with today's episode was this is outside our scope. So what did we do? You and I both separately, because you were doing that for your clients as well, went and read stuff, went and watched videos. I even opened the GDPR itself and started reading some articles because all the reading I was doing said, hey, look at this article, look at this article. And based on that, based on the reading I did, the actual regulation's not super wrapped in legalese. You can read some laws and they're just impossible to parse. GDPR is pretty straightforward on parsing it. So it was actually refreshing. But again, I'm not a lawyer. And the implementation of it was due today. So as of today, EU users can say, hey, can you delete my data? Or the regulators can say, did you get consent from all your users? Do you have a clear privacy policy? The other thing that I found really, before we get away from GDPR, because I think we're going to start to fade away from it here. The other part I found really fascinating was in the regulation itself, it said each member state is responsible for enforcement and for fines. I was like, holy cow, how many countries are there in the EU? And you're going to have that many plus a few different ways of interpreting the various articles within the GDPR. I could easily see some countries saying, we're going to be the privacy capital of the world and just use GDPR like a sledgehammer and just whacking companies left and right.
That sounds like they have a good motive for being privacy. There's others of, how's our financial situation right now? what can we squeeze out of the big players of data to fill our coffers? I mean, this is exactly the way that parking in Chicago works. You go to LA and park, the prices are half. You go to Chicago, they're really high. It pushes people to the street. They get lots of tickets. So I do think that there's a regional money grab that could happen too.
I'm not sure where that money goes because that's really interesting. If I'm fined as a company, do the users get that? Does the enforcement agency get that? Does the EU get that? Because you're absolutely right. Where that money goes is also going to drive enforcement. And again, I think we're going to see a wide variety of it, and without using the wording you used when we were discussing it last week, the main question is, are we going to get caught up in the middle of this anyway? And the answer is yes, we're going to get caught up in the middle of it, and we just got to we have to see how the early cases go, see who's out there really hammering on things, see what's going on. And I don't know, but I don't know. I'm just going to throw out an idea. If a specific country is enforcing it in a certain way, do you all of a sudden prohibit users of that country from using your service?
Yes.
Yeah. So that could be a way it goes as well. So
I think that it depends, of course, on how many existing users, what revenues are coming out of there. But I think you'll find if one country is taking advantage of this rule against the common grain, you'll see companies say, hey, like, I mean, this is no different than how Uber pulled out of cities, out of Austin, Texas, when the regulations there got hairy. Like, they need that money's good, but especially in a big city that has very little public transportation. But they were like, we're not going to fight a government on this. We're just going to pull out until the public pressure allows us to return, which is what happened. So I think you'll see that if a specific country decides we're going to play the GDPR whack-a-mole game with rules and regulations that are not clearly defined. But
yeah,
I guess
I'm fascinated by it, but there's also part of me that's like, yeah, I need to be concerned. But there was another LinkedIn comment where somebody said, listen, we're all having these great discussions on how to implement it. Everybody's situation is different. There is no general solution to being prepared for GDPR. You all have to do it on your own. So at the end of the day, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is you can get sued, and you're not going to be able to prevent that regardless. So
what you just brought up is that suing thing is where I try to where I figure out where am I responsible as a technology person. I follow the risk. I'm like, okay, what are the risks here? Involving GDPR, is there a risk of a hacker getting hold of our data and using it? No. GDPR doesn't have anything to do with me getting hacked. That's a technology risk that I need to protect. It's on my shoulders to handle. And if a company or if a government agency has a policy that presents legal risk, that's for an attorney to determine, in my opinion. Right. And so my discussions with clients recently has been, I will do what you need me to. You have to employ the right people to tell me what your exposure and risk is as a company to this policy. And I am not qualified to guess and make that judgment for you, the risk there. So you need to employ someone that does that. They tell me how to mitigate that risk on a policy level, and I determine what technology things I need to execute. So there's a common thing where I think there are attorneys that are trying to push it on the tech people of, you all need to follow this rule. And I'm like, no, you need to interpret the rule first. And that's hasn't been very successful for some of my clients getting me direction on what they need me to do for them.
Sure. So that's an interesting point, because I should just go start a legal firm, hire a couple lawyers that can read up on GDPR and go start a consulting practice, because I think we'd make money. But I do when I was doing the reading and the watching, one of the videos I was watching was essentially a commercial for frictionless contracts. So what they were trying to say was, listen, as a data processor, so we talked a little bit about how the data processors have a little less responsibility. As a data processor, what you need to do is you need to create a frictionless contract so that any of your controllers, you can just send them one contract to say, here's how we're going to handle it, deal with it. And by the way, here's our service that allows you to make frictionless contracts. So it was more of a sales pitch. There were a couple interesting points in there, I guess. But just wrap circle here on GDPR real quick. This is also the reading that we've done has made us at least know as much as we feel we can without being lawyers. And we're going to try, I think, to put out a different product, a different way of doing things within CTO Think. We're going to put out a little short explainer video on it. There are plenty of explainer videos out there. I don't know that ours is any better. You've seen a draft of the one I put together. I think it's good. I think it's meant to be, here's GDPR in 5 minutes. And here's the things to go attack right now. And 6 months from now, that may have to change based on how we see interpretation. But
at the beginning of your video and on the bottom of every slide, you have a disclaimer.
I do.
I am not a lawyer.
Not legal advice.
And that tells you enough right there. This is a legal question. Like I'm not trying to tell the listener, hey, kick this to the curb because you're not a lawyer. I'm trying to really put it into, this is one of the scenarios where if you try to become the expert without legal knowledge of how government policies and things go down, I think you're going to sell your company short.
Well, and I do want to tell a quick personal story here, and I think we will wrap on GDPR, and it's a failing. It's something I messed up on this a couple weeks ago. So we started talking. We had looked at it initially. We're like, yeah, we know how to export data. We know how to delete data. We don't have a lot here we have to deal with. But we were starting to get pressed on it. So we need to start coming up with a singular answer. So when that conversation started, I kind of kicked it back at the CEO. I'm like, yeah, go see what the lawyer says about this. That led to a week of nothing happening because the CEO was busy. None of us really had urgency on this because we felt we had it covered. And by kicking it to the curb, I kind of abdicated my responsibilities a little. Yes, it's a legal question. I'm not going to back off from that. But as the technology executive, it was my responsibility to go do the learning that I could do and put together a summary for the CEO saying, here's all the concerns I have. Here's all the risks I have. Now go to the attorney with these specific things.
Yeah.
And see what they say. See if they come up with anything additional. So that's just a quick personal story on how I messed up the initial review of it in trying to kick it off my plate. And that wasn't the right thing to do. So
okay.
That was but this leads to a broader topic, which is something I deal with a lot as well, is in general, as technology executives, we do get a lot of things that are either peripherally or directly responsible, that we're responsible for, and yet they fall outside our comfort zone. GDPR is a perfect example. I think every technology executive has gone through that pain over the past month. Another example I face is we get security information requests from potential clients. How is your data center secured? Is your data encrypted in transit or at rest? Do you have SOC 2 audits? Do you have SSAE 18 audits? Do you have Euro US Privacy Shield compliance? So a number of different things that are just outside of my comfort zone. Now, I certainly, what we've done over the time that we've been in the company is we've had to answer so many of these that the answer is almost always the same because the questions are almost always the same. So we built up a bit of knowledge. And to be honest, it's also why we use a Heroku. It's why we use an Amazon Web Services. Because what I'm going to say is, the only answer I can give you for data center security is what Amazon Web Services tells me. So here's a link to their page on their data center security. You want a SOC 2 report? Oh, I'll go request one from Amazon for you because SOC 2 doesn't cover a lot of what we do. It covers a lot of what they do. So again, it's another reason to outsource. Part of that is to lean on their experts. but that's another concrete example of things we're responsible for that are outside our comfort zone. Do you have an example of anything else that falls in that category?
Oh, I mean, all throughout my career, I get clients have brought me questions and challenges that I'm not qualified to handle. And I always come back with, all right, if the risk here falls onto my plate to handle and I am not qualified, the responsibility is for me to find the person that does know and to find out a cost efficient way, how can we get this information? So specifically, I had to build an authorization piece to an app that, didn't allow for, like, this is back when we were first getting APIs and mobile apps and stuff. And I had no idea how to set up authentication for this. And I hired a person for one specific task. I'm like, here are the requirements. I have no idea how to fulfill these requirements, but I talked to 3 different people, and my expertise was used in determining the best person to advise us at the right price. So, and I did that based on having worked with engineers, having worked with professionals, having worked in the tech industry, I knew who's the person blowing smoke up my butt on them being a consultant, and who actually can give me the right information that I feel comfortable in having been educated about this. So I don't ever hesitate to go outside of just reading. I am like, I'm hired to be the person responsible for finding the answers by any means necessary. And when it delves into a lot of expertise that requires years of training or certification, then you go and you hire that person. And it's on you, the lead tech leader, to make that choice to bring that person in. So I had to do it for when I worked at the finance company. We had audits because this is around the time that fraud, like Bernie Madoff, changed everything. And we started getting audits from clients trying to prevent another Madoff scenario. And I was getting these, like, fill out this whole form kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't know half the terms here. And I had to hire somebody to teach me, what does this mean? And what am I responsible for? And what would be your answer? And it helped because, just like you, the questions were typically routine after a while. And I was just kind of like, here's our form. Tell me what is being left out of your questions. And most often times people are like, oh, this suffices. And I didn't have to do anymore. But what I didn't do was say, oh, I'm going to become the expert on this level of compliance, because that wasn't really what my role was. My role was to manage our company being in compliance by whatever means we needed. We weren't going to hire a full-time compliance person at our size, but there was nothing wrong with hiring an expert to come in and advise us on it.
Right. So I do think, and I'd love to have a security expert come on to talk about this sort of thing, but you hit on a point there, which is some of the institutions we deal with are large universities. And they have IT staff probably close to 100, if not more. So they have security officers. Okay. They have a whole security department, data security department, which they should. Absolutely. And they come to us with requirements. And I'm not going to say that the requirements are less upon us because we're a small company. We all have to be secure when we're managing the data. What I'm curious about, though, and this is where I'd love to talk to a security person about it, is how do you approach that same standard of a SOC 2 audit or any of these other certifications that cost tens of thousands of dollars to apply for, where that would eat a significant portion of our profits for a year just to get that done. And by the way, you probably have to have it done every year. What does the certification buy us when we're doing the things? And I put it that way because that was exactly what the latest request came from. It came from their security officer, and he said, "I have no reason to doubt any of the things they're telling me. I just want to make sure they're doing the things," with doing the things in all capital letters. So it's interesting how a small business should approach these certifications, the rigor required for a lot of these things, as opposed to a large enterprise that is staffed up and lawyered up for this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where I would say a lot of the difficult work within Aspire EDU is in working outside the comfort zone. The managing of the technical projects and all that's second nature for the most part. Even the crises that come up, those are, you and I have been around long enough. We've seen enough crises that we know how to manage a crisis. But it's these outside the comfort zone, outside our knowledge area. I think your advice is sound as far as go get an expert that can do that. I also know there are startups that would say, okay, that's going to cost us thousands of dollars that we just don't have. So you're going to have to go figure out as best you can what the answer is.
I mean, well, let's talk about that, because risk management is never about being 100% risk-free. It's about weighing the costs and the benefits of being prepared at certain levels on certain things. So if you're working for a startup or you're working for any company, they say to you, if we are not in compliance with this, we can't sell our product enough to make money. We can't stay in business. We will perhaps suffer fines so significant that would put us out of business. Then you have a very good idea about how important is it for us to be in compliance with this. Right now, I guarantee you, there are companies out there, going back to GDPR, that are just ignoring it right now. They just are like,
for sure,
we don't care, or it's not a big deal. I think that is, in almost every case, a horrible approach to just not care. I don't necessarily think that a firm that's saying, we're not doing anything right now, we've weighed the risk, and we don't think it's that big, that anyone that gets hit will be Google or Microsoft, and we'll see how that happens. That's a valid strategy. It's a valid strategy to say, we are thinking about it, we've done the research, we're making a choice that we don't think that this will hit us, and are going to focus on features and other things. I feel like that's way better than just saying, not worth our time to even care about. So I feel like it's all about how it's driven to you. Again, we talked about policy risk, but any type of risk that comes at you in an area that you don't have expertise, you weigh how important it is versus what time and money you have to invest in taking care of it. 100%, 50%, 25%, or we give it a nominal glance. And in this world, you are never going to have all the money and time you need. Now, if a company executive comes to me and says, you are in charge of GDPR, you have no budget, and we're not going to give you extra time, then there's an employment question there about, I'm sorry, but you're asking me to do something that's outside of my expertise, and I have no budget and time to work on it, but I have all these existing demands. And I've been in those conversations on not compliance, but just you're giving me too much for one person to handle. What is going away here? That's the same thing. Is if you're not going to let me hire an expert, I'm not a lawyer. Where do you expect something's going to break here? Where's our breaking point on where we, step back on 100% compliance, or how the company is handling it? I tend to work with reasonable people, and so we never have a real debate on it. It typically is more of an issue if you're working for someone that cannot look at things in a rational way. But I think all these situations, you are always approaching them as, what is the risk level? What are the resources available to handle the risk? And what is the worst outcome versus the most likely outcome? Granted, we take one of these pathways to choosing it.
Sure.
And that's how I approach all this stuff. What I found over the years is that nothing is quite as devastating as it comes out from the press. And you usually will cover 80% of everything by just reading up on it and knowing what is involved. And then you find out from users, clients, the attorney that works for your company or whatever, this is what we really feel is the biggest risk, and we need to handle that. And it's never 100% of everything. We don't need to be a company that is a GDPR expert. And I would say, working for smaller companies, I like to pay attention to what the bigger companies do. And so I got a lot of knowledge off of what Postmark, the company that I outsource a lot of email delivery, did a terrific, one of the most excellent blog posts about how their company handled GDPR. And I just learned so much from the way that they phrased it. And I felt like I walked away from reading that as, oh, I'm much more informed now. And I care actually a lot less about this than I thought, because they did a lot of the research and work and then just handed it over. And they didn't say that, they said, we are not lawyers and we're not 100% on this. But I came away from it all knowing that, oh, everybody's winging this right now. I'm no different. I just need to be sure that I can answer questions about it to clients and direct them in the right way if they decide that this matters to them.
Yeah, and I want to go ahead and bring that around to the beginning again, and that may be where we end up. Is one of the things I read was, go read the article on the fines and see what they take into account when they're determining what the fines will be. Once I read that, and again, it was not legalese, it was plain English. Once I read that, and I read that they're looking for negligence, they're looking for intentional negligence, they're looking for, I don't remember the term, but they're looking for intentional behavior. All of a sudden I was like, okay, they're not out here trying to screw companies just for making mistakes. They're out here trying to punish the intentionally bad, whether it's through intentional behavior or intentional negligence. Yeah. If you do your due diligence and you put things in place based on my non-legal reading of this legal document, you're going to be in a good place. You're going to have a basis to at least have a conversation. Again, you want to get into worst case scenarios? Yes. One of these countries is going to come out and say, not the way we interpret it, and be done with it.
Well, let's put this in a non-technical example, because I have a really good one that happens around Chicago. Food, restaurant inspections. We have a very rigorous restaurant system for inspections and compliance on a health code, like a lot of big cities do. As you get into smaller towns, it drops significantly how much regulation. And restaurants here have a problem where in the past you had to pay off the inspectors and they would leave you alone. And because of Chicago getting better on patronage and that kind of stuff, they've eliminated a lot of the people that were unqualified to be inspectors to some degree. But what you do find is that you'll be watching, I think Yelp or every block will report inspections, and you'll see this whole line of inspections up a whole street. All of a sudden, in one day, failure, 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 failure. And the pattern suggests that an overzealous inspector walked through and found every little thing they can find that was wrong. And based on how that particular restaurant responded to that person, they got hammered a lot more. Now, I'm taking a lot of I'm taking a lot of liberty with how I'm assessing this, but when a newspaper comes in and interviews a restaurant about this inspection process, you hear a lot about bias. You hear a lot about the assessment of us being negligent was biased or excessive. So I guess the point I want to make is when you interpret something in a document as, oh, you need to show negligence to actually be guilty, there's still a large part of human emotion and bias that comes into play on, does a regulator go after you on something you did wrong? And that is a big risk there that is hard to mitigate on just reading out a statement on a piece of paper, because almost every regulatory body has somebody, like if you get into the business of regulators, or it's kind of like the hammer and nail. If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're a regulator and you really take that job seriously, what level of perfection do you go after? I don't tend to run into problems with regulators and stuff, but you always do have that person that's having a bad day. And how do they assess what you did wrong, and what penalty do they put it to you at? So there's a level of human error there, or bias, that I think you have to keep in consideration with that stuff, right?
Right, for sure. So I want to wrap up the whole conversation on two notes that came across Twitter as we were talking. One is, and it's awesome that we're doing this episode today, because today will be the most newsworthy day, I think, for a while. But there's and I'm going to use the exact term the Reuters article used. There's a lawyer and privacy activist, okay, and I emphasize the word activist, that has already filed complaints against Google, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp based on the fact that you have to consent or you cannot use their service, and that's a violation of GDPR. I don't interpret it that way, but already you're seeing the start of what's to come. Yeah. So there's a lot to come. So that was on the more factual side. On the lighter side, I assume you know what LexisNexis is.
Yeah.
LexisNexis has been around forever. It's one of the first technology things we probably ever heard of, right? Yeah. It's a database of legal documents, if I remember right, and legal journals and things like that. There was somebody put out a Twitter post that LexisNexis is so old school that they actually sent a letter to everyone regarding compliance with GDPR as opposed to an email. So, yeah. Last question, because you brought up food regulations. You also grew up in the state of Georgia, which has the rating system for food inspections, where you got a grade from something to 100. At what number do you go, yeah, I'm not eating here today? That was always my question. If there's an 82, am I eating there or am I not?
Oh, well, I don't know. I guess, have I gone into a restaurant that will advertise their 80 rating?
They don't have a choice. It's got to be in public view.
I've never turned around from I haven't gone to many restaurants that have a number that low. Let me put it a different way. I have canceled Uber rides when the rating is below a 4 or below a 4.2 because I'm like, this person's about to get kicked off of Uber and I don't want to be in their ride at this level. So that I have made that judgment. On the food grade, there are restaurants right now that I will not recommend to people because I have noticed they have failed once a year they fail. And I feel like that's too much. Like there are restaurants.
Well, that's showing that they're cutting corners. So that,
they're getting lazy. Sense. It's really about getting lazy. They get caught because they get lazy on very routine things. It's always about food storage and temperature almost all the time, or animal infestation. And but then there's a restaurant down the street. They got hammered for the first time in 4 years. And the number of issues that came up, I was like, oh, somebody mouthed off to the inspector and they just hammered them because all of the things were correctable within minutes. And and they talked to the press and they were like, this is kind of crap because this person was brand new to inspecting and they took everything literally and they didn't even communicate with our staff like a human being should. And so, but going back to your question, I will walk into a barbecue place with a rating of 80 because I don't expect any good barbecue to come out of 100% clean place. There's got to be be some grime in that barbecue.
For sure. All right. Well, I think that took us to the end, and we've got a long week ahead of us. Which, to me, I don't know how you treat them, but long weekends are more opportunity for me to get more done because I don't have as many people to pick up the phone and answer them calling.
Yeah,
I see them as opportunities to work more and learn more. So I guess you can consider that relaxing. But
I'm not reading a damn thing about GDPR, though. I guarantee you that.
I expect you to watch my video at least one more time.
Oh, I'll do that. That's fine. That's fine.
All right. Very good. We will talk again next week.
Yep. Later.
Thanks for listening to the CTO Think podcast. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at ctothink.com. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. Patreon contributions help us to produce episode transcripts, which allow people that are deaf or hard of hearing to access the show. If you have feedback, ideas, or want to be a guest, please email us at hello@ctothink.com. Show music is Dumpster Dive by Mark Wallach, licensed by PremiumBeat.com. Voiceover work by MeganVoices.com. You'll hear from us next week.